Good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning. This is your Friday morning, and I'm Ozarks first meteorologist Tom Schmidt. With me today is the lead meteorologist, lead forecaster at National Weather Service, Springfield, Missouri, Steve Runnell. Steve, did I get that right?
Well, technically warning coordination meteorologist.
Boy, that's right.
Big title, small position, but yes.
And you've been around the Springfield area for quite some time now.
I do date back with the National Weather Service to 1995, January the 1st, 1995.
Okay, been here a long time. You've seen some things, seen some storms, and we just had a most recent round of storms come through. That would have been last Friday, so 1 week ago today. And just one of many you've seen over your career. You guys were out, of course, doing surveying, and we're going to talk a little bit about how those surveys are completed. How do you guys come up with the numbers, EF1, EF2, or EF4, EF5? Where does that come from? But, Steve, you said you wanted to start with a little story talking about the man himself, Mr. Fujita.
Yes, as a new meteorologist, Evansville, Indiana, we had an event, Allendale, Illinois, that pretty much wiped out the entire town. And it was the first major tornado that I had an opportunity to visit. And we were going out doing our survey, and we're pretty comfortable with a rating. In this case, it was a F3. And that had a certain mile per hour designation. We felt pretty good about ourselves. We cut back to the office and started hearing things that a gentleman by the name of Professor Fujita was actually on the site. And for anybody within the weather world knows that he's a god. He's one of the original guys that were really instrumental in determining what kind of wind speeds can we determine from the damage. He had his crew out there, and he was able to correct me to say, no, that wasn't an EF3, but it was rather an EF4 based on the fact that this particular tornado had debris getting flown backwards against the direction the storm was moving. So there's a lot of dynamics that goes into tornadoes and how we try to determine what the most likely wind speed is.
Well, there you go. So you were corrected by the best.
The best, yes.
Absolutely. Well, and so, Steve, now here's a question. Did you go out and were you on some of these survey trips yourself?
Yeah, okay. Friday was a bad day for a lot of communities, and I did have the opportunity to look at the tornado northeast of Diggins, and I did have the opportunity to go down to Bakersfield as well, and then since then a couple other sites. But the Bakersfield tornado was certainly one of the worst storms that we've had, almost going all the way back to the Joplin tornado. So it was a remarkable event in many ways, and unfortunately it did lead to 3 fatalities.
That one did, and yeah, that was a big one. It might actually be maybe one of the biggest ones since I've only been here 2 years now. It was large. And like I said, the fatalities, never easy to go out there. And so when you guys are kind of going out there, you're going into these situations, into these scenarios, you may know some of the impacts already from emergency management and local authorities, but sometimes you may not know anything, maybe walking into some unknown territory for the first time. How do you approach that when you're entering into these disaster zones, essentially, kind of walking up to these people's lives that have been changed forever? What's your approach to that?
Yeah, certainly. We've got a varied reasoning for being out there. We do want to know from a chronological perspective, what's Mother Nature capable of doing? How frequently does she produce EF5 tornadoes versus EF0 tornadoes? The opportunity starts with a report compared back against radar. Is there a likelihood that a tornado occurred? We would like to get as much information, whether it be from storm spotters, from emergency management, or other partners, or just the general public, to tip us off. Where is a tornado likely to have gone? And of course, when the storms are that intense, you get a lot of information in a hurry, whereas weaker tornadoes, sometimes you're right. You just have to be driving down the road and you ultimately see a tree or two, and that leads to a path. So in the case of Bakersfield or any of the other tornadoes that touched down last Friday, the opportunity started with radar. And of course, we'd issued a lot of tornado warnings. We had an idea where the circulations were. But then on top of that, now what kind of reports do we have coming in? In real time, they're great. They're able to share with you guys, and then you can beam them into people's living rooms. But we do take that information. We take the information from social media, anything that we can get our hands on to try to start our path. Then we have to go out and just do some grunt work, looking at all the evidence that we possibly can find in order to try to determine the most likely wind speeds.
And so, what you guys have done here, you said you were down at the Bakersfield storm yourself for a little ways, and this one came out as an EF3. So, I mean, what? And you were, you've seen storms before, of course, in the past. Several of them been on these surveys. When you go to these surveys, I mean, what are you looking for? What's some of the damage criteria to where you come up with this was an EF3, and not only in that category, but also had a specific wind speed?
Sure enough. And the answer to that goes back many, many years. I mentioned Dr. Fujita. He gave us the F scale. Over time, we came to realize that there was an opportunity to improve that, to get a more accurate wind speeds. A bunch of engineers got together, and they created what is now called the Enhanced Fujita scale. And it is centered on the ability to look at different damage indicators. So as a tornado goes through a community, it's going to damage a mobile home. It's going to knock down trees or power lines, maybe well-built structures. Those engineers then followed that damage indicator up with a degree of damage that allows a certain wind speed to be tied to that damage indicator and that degree of destruction. And if you compare it to each other, it does give you a pretty reasonable idea of just how strong those winds were.
Sure.
So as we get on site, say Bakersfield, and yes, there were homes that were completely destroyed. Compare that next to maybe a tree or power pole or other indicators that we, from an engineering standpoint, have a pretty good feel for what those wind speeds were. Yes, there are some architectural aspects, engineering aspects,
Right.
that if you have a slab foundation versus cinder block, how are the walls attached to that foundation? If the roof is attached to the walls using hurricane clips or other things that keeps the structure intact, your home is likely to withstand more wind. You're still going to get some roofing damage. You're still going to get some windows broken. So if we know the architecture, the engineering of the structure, we can still start to look for that degree of damage. If your home is totally destroyed, if that mobile home is completely separated from the frame, those engineers have given us a good place to start. So you just kind of take it like an episode of CSI and try to put all those pieces together to determine the most likely wind speeds.
Okay, so that's interesting. Okay, yeah, so it's all about talking about the architectural integrity of some buildings, trees snapping versus being completely lofted, I'm guessing, goes into parts of it. And you
Yeah.
guys have like a list you take with, like, there's like a criteria list out there somewhere, right?
Yeah, and in fact, everybody can go online and do a Google on EF scale and kind of have an idea where we're coming from with those DIs and DODs, the damage indicators, and the degree of destruction. But ultimately, there is a lot of opportunity for us to learn. I've had, unfortunately, living in the Ozarks, going back to Joplin and other strong to violent tornadoes, there is opportunity to work with engineers, to listen to what they're seeing and then try to apply that. Again, how is that foundation? Is it an engineered electrical pole or cell tower? We had a railroad tower go down northeast of Diggins during this last storm.
Yeah.
There are some events in which we do know mathematically how strong that wind should be based upon the damage that we're witnessing, and then there's others that we do try to learn from and try to just put the pieces together and figure most out. Now the other side, Tom, is Friday they were all tornadoes. That was pretty clear. Often, especially from squall lines as they produce their tornadoes, it is a little bit more of a challenge. So for stronger tornadoes, you're going to see a pattern. Trees down to the east, the north, the west, the south along a path. Weaker tornadoes, typically the debris is going in one direction, and it's much more difficult. So yes, we do need those storm spotters. We do need eyewitness accounts to help start the process, and then we just kind of go out and try to figure out as best we can.
Okay. So one of the storms we had, we'll just go through some of these pictures here to kind of give folks a sense. This was the dig into the Webster County, Wright County EF1 tornado. And this picture here, you can see the house was largely okay. A little bit of reef damage, maybe some siding damage, but in this case, this was like a chicken shed, a chicken house that had been like just blown away. Um, and so you're kind of talking about that. The chicken shed typically just kind of a metal tin structure, and whereas a home might be a little bit more reinforced, got some wood bracings on it, foundationed to like a concrete floor. And this was more of I was out there yesterday looking around at this particular damage, and it seemed like a pretty clear path on this one.
Yeah,
Where it went, but it's not always like that.
It is certainly not always like that. And Friday storms are the path lengths are 50, 60, 80, 100 miles in length. So
Yeah, long track.
as it went through Diggins, the damage that you see there obviously is very vivid. And any tornado is going to be a devastating event for the family that suffers it. It really doesn't matter if it's an EF0 or EF5. But in this particular case, the debris, the tin that you're seeing, they're outbuildings, but outbuildings vary considerably. There's a couple $100,000 equipment barn versus, as you mentioned, the chicken coop, and a lot of the features that you see externally are going to be the same. There's the walls, there's the tin roof, and then if you see that tin get deposited, certainly it makes it for a vivid scene. So yes, sometimes you can come across a scene and you're like, oh my gosh, this is horrible. It must be an EF3, EF4, EF5, and yet based upon how it's built, it might just be an EF0, which is an indication of winds barely above severe thunderstorm threshold.
Sure, yeah, that's a good point. And so, kind of sticking with this, when you guys are going out and doing the surveys, do you have to have some kind of like engineering understanding when you're looking at things, and do you have people out there that'll help you, kind of give you maybe a better background of the building you're looking at, or are you just kind of going in blind to these scenarios?
Sure, I guess it's kind of a badge. If you've been in an area that has enough bad storms, you're kind of regarded as knowing what you're looking at. And we do have a number of engineers that do come in and help us out for the higher end tornadoes. Sure. An event like Joplin back in 2011, 10,000 structures affected. Try to look for the worst damage to the best built structure is one place to start. Were there any banks damaged? Were there well-built homes that were leveled to the ground? And that's one of the ways in which we approached Bakersfield as well, to try to quickly come to a conclusion as far as what those wind speeds were.
Okay, right. And so, speaking of that Bakersfield tornado, this picture was from 56, Arkansas, which, if I'm thinking this correctly, that was the same storm that came up into Bakersfield and then on towards Howell County?
I do know that the Bakersfield tornado did go south of the border into Arkansas. I can't say this particular area was because there were several tornadoes in Arkansas.
Yes.
Yes. Including Cave City, which took a pretty bad hit.
Yeah, that was.
But as you look at the scene, you see the damage to the trees, and that's what's going to get hit most often. How are those trees laid out? Are the limbs torn off those trees? You mentioned earlier a tree that's snapped. Well, a tree that's uprooted has a certain wind speed. Let's just say 90 mile per hour. A tree that's snapped actually is an indication of greater wind speeds. Trees that are splintered, like we saw in Bakersfield, would be even stronger. Sure. So it goes back to the type of tree. It goes back to the health of the tree, the foundation. For example, if the ground's wet, that tree is going to uproot faster. If it's dry and maybe even in a drought condition, it might snap before the winds cause that tree to fail. But on top of that, then look at power lines. Look at the other things, not just the structures that are affected. The trees and whatnot do help us identify the path quicker. But when it comes to those structures, we do want to certainly look at them from an engineering standpoint as much as we can and try to determine those wind speeds.
Okay, so you're talking about snap trees versus uprooted trees, power lines. I mean, you guys just have to get out there and look at everything. See what impacted this. How is this different from that structure? How is this structure different?
Yes, and when you start talking about a path length of 10 miles, 50 miles.
Oh, yeah.
There's only so much that you can see and try to rate within a quick period following the tornado. We do have other devices these days. Many people have heard of the Doppler on wheels and other devices
Right.
that are out there that are trying their best to determine just how strong these winds are. We have satellite. We have the ability to look at paths via flyovers, whether it be from helicopters or planes. And we're getting all of this data in since the Friday event and try our best to determine not only the intensity, but what is the overall path length.
And so, Steve, I guess my next question here would be, speaking of that and all this other technology, last year, of course, being the very active year that it was, you had several large tornadoes that were kind of out in the middle of fields, didn't impact anything, which is great. Um, but because of that, they didn't hit anything, and they went down as a lower rating than what some folks may have thought. Hey, this should have been higher.
Yes.
So, is there any push or thought on changing the EF scale, or maybe incorporating some of these other sources like Doppler radar or satellite into the rating?
Yeah. Yes. Last year, it was kind of the year in which the tornadoes came back to the plains. Here in our area, we're responsible for 37 counties. That's 3 in southeast Kansas, 34 in Missouri. We had 40-ish tornadoes. We had over 700 events involving large hail or damaging winds. So yes, last year was a it's above normal year from a climatological perspective,
Right.
but it was a year that was far above what we'd seen the last several years before that. So there were a couple of tornadoes in particular over into the eastern Ozarks that kind of come in mind as being the most noteworthy events. Again, longer track tornadoes, EF2, EF3 in intensities, and in particular the one you may recall along Highway 60 that went through the Mountain View area.
Yes.
Actually, that was a series of 3 different tornadoes, but majority of it was in a very rural setting in which just trees were affected before it hit the homes and the buildings and businesses along 60. So, no matter where that tornado goes, in our area, in the Ozarks, it's likely to hit something. It might just be trees. Unfortunately, it might be a barn or even a home. Out west in the plains, it becomes much more difficult because you don't have all those indicators. And in a way, we're luckier because those tornadoes out west tend to be a little stronger. Tornadoes here, if you get them from a structure called a supercell, they have the potential to be strong or violent. But we get more tornadoes from squall lines than we do from supercells.
Sure.
Going back to the other part of your question on, what other means do we have of determining tornado damage in a climatological aspect? That Doppler on wheels does have the ability to detect wind speeds, much like our Doppler radar here at the Springfield Airport does. It does have the ability to look at the circulation and then from there try to give an indication of strength. But one thing to consider, just like our radar beam goes up with distance, the Doppler on wheels does as well. And while there are multiple abilities of vehicles to be on the road to give us this on-site wind speed, they're not everywhere. So it is an opportunity from a academic standpoint to take a look at those storms, but it is recognized that wind speed is aloft as opposed to immediately at the structure that is affected. The other devices, satellite, there is more and more of an indication of tree fall pattern. Was it just a single tree or was it a grove of trees? Were those trees picked up and thrown? These are, from a engineering standpoint, something that we can study and ultimately try to better determine just what those wind speeds are.
And so nothing in the works for changing the scale officially. It'll probably come up again. It's bound to.
Even when the EF scale was determined, there was still great debate, and that's the value of science. We do have the opportunity to come up with a vision, test that vision, and then apply it, and then go back and reapply it through research. So the EF scale, and I wish I could tell you how far back in time we went to that, has been around. It's been around the block. It's given us the opportunities in both very weak tornadoes as well as unfortunately very strong tornadoes to try to test it out. And it's what the best thing that we've got available to us now outside of an engineer telling us this particular pole or device was used to withstand 200 mile per hour winds, and that particular building is now destroyed. So aside from those engineering approaches, going out looking at it with our eyes is the best approach that we've got these days.
And so, Steve, I guess my final question here from me would be, why does it matter? You know, an EF2 or an EF3. I mean, why is having that the kind of the tornado scale given important? Why should we be looking for those numbers?
Absolutely. And here's the sad thing: if it strikes a structure, it doesn't matter if it's an EF0 or EF5. It's the worst thing that's happened to that family. But there are things to be gained. If we do have a climatological record of how strong tornadoes are in a particular area, what's the frequency of a storm producing 150, 175, 200 mile per hour winds, that does give a heads up to architects, to engineers, to people who are building schools, just what type of building structure, building foundations have to be established. How much rebar, how much cement, what type of structure do you want to attach the roof to the walls? These are things that from a climatological perspective, we do try to go out and research and be as accurate as we can. And then the builders in the future will use that information to better prepare the community, better prepare the ability to survive the storm. We do know that every home has a safer location, but not every structure is completely safe. So if we can also learn on where those wind refuge areas are. For example, if you've got an engineered storm shelter, that's going to withstand 200 mile per hour winds.
Sure.
But not everybody's got one of those. If you have a basement, well, where's the safest spot in a basement? If you don't have, can you go from your upstairs to your downstairs to the middle part of your structure? We know these things anecdotally based upon the history of going out and doing storm surveys. As we learn more and more about engineering and apply that, we can tell people with greater confidence, where are the safest locations? Where can we put kids in schools or people in factories in order to increase the survivability of these events? Because we know they are going to continue going on into the future. And as better as we understand Mother Nature, as better as we can use Doppler radar or other tools to tell people what is the magnitude or what is the impact of a particular tornado, we can enhance the response and therefore enhance the survivability.
Well, Steve, thank you for your time today. Anything else you can think to say on the matter of the storm surveys, the scale, any final thoughts there?
Yeah, I think one thing, as I mentioned, last year we had 40 tornadoes. This year it's already started out. We may not get another tornado of the magnitude that we saw down in Bakersfield, or this could be a very significant storm spring. We just don't know, and we value working with you, with the other broadcasters, with our partners with the emergency management field, with basically anybody that can influence others. So I guess the last thing I would care to say is this: I cannot tell you when the next tornado is going to affect your community. But what I can tell, going back to 95 and the history prior to that, from a scientific point of view, we do know that tornadoes are going to occur. We do know some of those are going to be stronger than others. But ultimately, from a family perspective, from a business owner perspective, anything that can be done to identify those wind refuge or storm shelter capabilities, we know together we are going to save lives. So, Tom, I thank you. I thank all the broadcasters out there, all our partners with the emergency management community, and then businesses, people in charge of churches, anybody who is assigned the responsibility to determine safe locations and be willing to go there. That's how we're going to together save lives.
That's right. Good to be prepared before the storm strikes. Know where to go, have a kit ready, all those type of safety things that we kind of beat the drum on. Seems like every spring and really throughout the year. Okay, now, Steve, you guys at the Weather Service, you have a couple storm spotter training classes coming up. And I just want to take a review at that list, and you can tell us a bit more about what people can expect when they register for these classes and they show up? What are they going to get out of these?
Well, the most important thing this year, while we still want the amateur radio, the volunteer fire, the police officers, the guys with radios on their hips to come to the training, we have opened it back up to the public. And this is a great opportunity to not only come and learn and gain storm awareness, but also put yourself in a position to correctly identify a tornado or other severe phenomena, be able to report it in as quick a fashion as we can to get that information back to the Weather Service, aids in our warning process, and then ultimately it confirms the threat to the people in the path of the storm. So if you're interested in becoming a storm spotter, it's not something that I would say you would put the kids in the back end of the car and go find this tornado. No, just spot from your own home. Firemen, spotting from a mobile perspective versus a going out to the storm shelter, or I'm sorry, the fire station. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, anywhere from where you're working to where you're at home, if you're at church, if you have the ability to correctly identify a tornado or other phenomena that's going to lead to the tornado, it will increase the Weather Service's situational awareness. And then from there, we can help the broadcasters out know which storms are likely to produce a tornado. And that's what it takes to get people to respond. As soon as we can confirm the threat, we do know that people go quicker to safety. So, yes, if you go to our website, weather.gov/Springfield, there is a spot at the top of the page that does list the remaining storm spotter classes that we've got out there. We've had many already, about almost 30 already this year, and we've got a few more before the end of the training season comes up in a couple weeks.
All right, there you go, folks. Check it out on their website right here, 2025 spotter class schedule. It'll pull up this list of what they've got coming up for you. Go check it out. Well, Steve, thanks for being here today. Appreciate your time this morning on your Friday. Are you off this weekend?
I am. Yes.
You
yes,
are? Okay.
yes.
So a nice quiet weekend, let's hope. A little stormy, possibly, Saturday night.
Yeah, it'll be a little quieter than last weekend.
Oh, sure.
But yes, there is a chance for thunderstorms. You just never know in the Ozarks here. But maybe some hail, maybe a little bit of wind, but it's hopefully not going to be as bad as it was last week.
Right. All right, good to know there. Well, Steve, thanks for being here. Enjoy your weekend, and everyone else, have a good weekend yourself.